we know something's internally wrong. And it's almost always
Mhm.
attitude, which
Mhm.
hangs the fruit of everything that comes after that. Because if the attitude is bad, so is the integrity. If the integrity is bad, so is the motivation, so is the drive, so is the perseverance, so is the fortitude, so is the determination and devotion. All of it hangs on the attitude of the inner self. So if the inner self is corrupted, then everything else on the outside has to corrupt also.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand. What do you do when those around you are not willing to rise to their full potential? Well, our guest today is Dr. DeAngelo Richardson, an award winning international speaker, life coach, and founder of Different Reasons. A few months ago, I was lucky enough to interview him, but it was solo because Michael couldn't join us that day. And we wanted to have him back because his spirit and guidance really stood out to us. And now this time, Michael's here. So the last time we were here, we talked about empowering individuals to reach their full potential, but this time we're turning the tables on Dr. Richardson, and we're going to ask him how he handles things when someone isn't willing to grow.
Welcome back to Be Bold Branding, Dr. Richardson.
Thank you, Michael. Nice to be here. Nice to be here. Again. Again.
That's right.
Yes, yeah. I hate that I missed the first one, and so I'm excited about being on this one. And this is a subject that is really sort of dear to my heart. I like the fact that Tanya brought up this, this little spin, about how do you motivate somebody that doesn't seem to be motivated. So you want to get right into that topic and sort of tackle that question right off the bat?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing and the most important thing is to reintroduce the individual to themselves. So you have to remind them of, we've all had this process or this journey that we've had to undergo to get where we are. So them not feeling valued or feeling motivated to go to the next step, like you have to be reminded of how you got to where you are. It helps you to rediscover yourself and what obstacles it took for you to become who you know yourself in that moment. So for someone who doesn't have that drive, for one, they have to see value in what they do. They have to understand how it's going to benefit them, how it's going to benefit everyone else. But they also have to see that they're not doing it for them; they're doing it for someone else because someone else is going to add value to them in the process. So when they're reintroduced to themselves, they get an opportunity to see, okay, well this path is not necessarily about me. I can't grow. I can't achieve. I can't go to the next level. I limit myself if I choose not to be motivated. I choose, you don't want to, as an individual, you can't block a potential path to see a better version of yourself. So them knowing that there's a better version of themselves, you have to find a way to reintroduce them to themselves so they remember or be able to reconnect with the inner them, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, it does. My grandpa always said that every person has to stop and take stock. So is that what you're saying? Is that another way to say it? Like, and when you're trying to help motivate somebody, especially if it's a team member that's necessary for what you're trying to get done, you have to try to get them to stop and say, hey, let's look at this right here. Why did you get into this? Why did you start this? How have you lost focus of that? Is
Or
that
lost
sort of?
heart, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. It's interesting. My cohort director, when I was in my doctoral program, he always reminded us of the why. Why are you going through what you're going through? Why are you doing it? And sometimes the why changes. The why may not ever be the same, but the motivation behind it almost never changes. And it's always going to identify whatever the root initiative is, whatever the root cause, whatever the root interest is. So if you can discover that, it's almost it's not much effort that goes into the motivation piece because the why is always the root of who you are as an individual. Now, the only problem I've found that comes into play is when someone discovers the why and then they are reinventing themselves in the process. Because it's possible that we lose the essence of who we are and we find that we're becoming someone that we should have been, in comparison to the person that we've been the entire time. But then even in that process, there's still the reconnecting with you internally, and the root cause is again, it's always the same. It's always the same. Your motivation and your drive is all designed behind, or it's all driven by what your end goal is. the end goal for most people is always success. It's always love. It's always prosperity. It's always more. So if you can, if we collectively as a community can help people understand what more looks like, because more sometimes is not always monetary gain. It's not always substance. It's not always more vehicles, more cars. It's not always more vacation. Sometimes it's more peace. Sometimes it's more time and availability. Sometimes it's more and better health. Sometimes it's more community. Sometimes it's more environment. Sometimes it's more or a diverse culture. So the why someone's motivated, it has to connect with who they believe they are. And that's the tough part about motivating an individual, because now you have the charged responsibility of getting to know who they are, because it's an interpersonal relationship. And then essentially it changes you also. So getting them to that point where they're always willing to discover something new about themselves to help them grow, I think it brings the entire experience full circle.
Oh, that's great. That's good stuff. Do you think that's a good question to ask people when you're like, okay, so we're sort of, it's ingrained in us to say, okay, what's your why? Why are you doing this? Right? Like, is it okay to say to somebody like you're trying to help motivate, look, what would you like to see more of in your life? Is that a good intro, or is it?
It's a thought-provoking question, because it forces you to look deeper. Like the surface answer is always going to be something superficial because it's the closest thing that you can identify with. But when you ask the why, it forces you to really evaluate. I was talking to a mentor of mine maybe 3 weeks ago, and he asked me, why do I want to do it? And I've been doing it for quite some time now, but I had to ask myself again in that moment, why am I really doing this? Like, why does this matter? Like, what's the passion behind me making this decision or to choose this career path? And the answer was always something selfless. It's always, well, I want to see other people's lives different from my own. I believe this person may be a better fit individual for this responsibility and compared to myself. So it's the why is always going to be either a selfish act or a selfless act. But either way, it has to transcend and integrate one way or another, to where you'll have moments where you should be selfish, but then you also have moments where you need to be selfless also. But that's the double-sided role of the experience, because now you're constantly discovering or breaking down the why. Because it's always going to change, but it's going to change based on the experiences you're having behind the motives.
Makes perfect sense. And it leads into the next question is there a difference between someone who's unmotivated and someone who's actually just resistant to change?
So that used to be me, resistant to change. And what I learned, and because having both those experiences, being resistant to change and then not being motivated. So the motivation comes from just a lack of interest, or something about the environment or the task or the journey. It just doesn't align with the individual's level of understanding at that period of time. But the resistance to change is just not having a desire to submit to something that could possibly work. So a resistance to change is a stalemate for yourself. It's you choosing not to grow because you know that growth is going to put you in a position where you're going to have more responsibility, or you're going to potentially have to take on a responsibility that you don't feel you're prepared for, or maybe you haven't been prepared for it. But resistance to change it's more of I feel like I can do it with the knowledge that I have now, and that's almost far from the truth. But then the lack of motivation could also be a result of the resistance to change. Because if you choose not to change, then you'll become stale, stagnant, and then you lose your motivation for that moment in time, or wherever you are, you'll lose the motivation because of your resistance to change, because you haven't been willing to expose yourself to something new or different. And that's where the growth process is being able to be vulnerable to the possibility of something transformative or new.
Yeah, I like that. How does one differentiate between a genuine lack of motivation and external factors like might be hindering growth?
I would have to say it's attitude. And that's something that you can look externally at something and see that there's an internal negative attitude about whatever it is. And when you look at, let's take for example Walmart. Let's say Walmart and let's not say Walmart. I don't know if you all remember the grocery store, Farmer Jack.
No.
Farmer John. Okay, so not a restaurant, it was a grocery store actually. But if you look at like how business is designed based on who can satisfy the needs, the desires, and the marketability that attracts the consumer. So when you see businesses fail, when they stop appealing to the consumer, it's because they didn't change with the societal norm or the cultural norm for the group of people within that region of wherever that business is located. And that tells you everything about that business's growth. And it's ultimately based on the culture of the people who work within that business, but the leadership as well. So you see an external result of the internal attitude towards the process. Because wherever there's when you see something stop growing or it dies off, you can tell that it's not being fed the proper, if we were to call it a plant, the proper nutrients to keep it flourishing and blossoming in front of what the eye can see. So if we look at an individual and we see that externally they're not living up to what we believe the expectation is or what appeals to us as the other side of the external factor, we know something's internally wrong. And it's almost always attitude, which hangs the fruit of everything that comes after that. Because if the attitude is bad, so is the integrity. If the integrity is bad, so is the motivation, so is the drive, so is the perseverance, so is the fortitude, so is the determination and devotion. All of it hangs on the attitude of the inner self. So if the inner self is corrupted, then everything else on the outside has to corrupt also.
Like what you're hearing? Hit that subscribe button and learn how you can change how you're seen and charge what you're worth. Oh, and I think you're right. That
Yeah.
attitude is the first place you notice it, because you notice zest for something or resistance to something in that attitude first. It's like that outward factor that and when we have conflict, conflict with team members is not unheard of, right? It can happen when you're trying to seek harmony in that, and you're trying to get that person who's either a little resistant or some sort of factor is inhibiting them from being a true team member. How do you approach the conversation with them on that?
I think for me, and I'm speaking from experience, invite them into the conversation with their perspective first and stay one step behind them, because when you position yourself and this is just a skill that I've learned through listening, when you position yourself to receive information that you can't, or you have to evaluate in the midst, you can understand where the individual is coming from or where they're speaking from. So if you invite them into that conversation, they're almost going to tell you everything you need to know in the beginning before you ever ask any questions or before you ever render any advice or propose a different avenue of approach. So just invite them into that conversation and kind of play the psychological game to see where they are. And then that's where you begin to navigate the process forward for not just them, but for yourself also. Because remember, you're a part of you being a part of that conversation, you're a part of the transaction as well. So they're feeding you and you're feeding them at the same time. It's just how much will you allow them to feed you before you determine, okay, here's what the problem is. This is a suggestion. But then you have to look within yourself also, like, okay, am I properly equipped to handle this?
Yeah.
Sure.
Man, you articulate this stuff so well. Let me ask you, from a personal standpoint, do you believe that there is such a thing as a totally unmotivated person? Or do you think that there's always this buried, like that motivation is in everybody, it's just buried so deep that a person looks unmotivated? Does that make?
It does make sense. I don't believe that there's a totally unmotivated person. And if there is, I believe it's based on circumstances. Like they may be experiencing something in their personal life. Like for example, when my wife and I, when we spent time separated, that was the most unmotivated moment of my life because I'm outside of my element. I'm not seeing my wife and children as often as I would like to. So it kind of channels the brain to a different area of focus. Now, someone who's completely unmotivated, it's almost always because they haven't seen or begun to understand the dynamic of why they aren't motivated, and it's usually because something's not lining up with the expectation that we're given. See, so a person who's motivated, they're always motivated by however success is painted to them, and when they don't see that result, it doesn't feel like reality anymore. And it's because they've allowed themselves to accept the end result as the everyday reality. It does not work. It just doesn't work that way.
So in other words, they're looking for some gold at the end of the rainbow to deem their day worthy and their journey worthy. And if they don't see that, then they feel like they're lost on a hamster wheel.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
it's because they don't understand how, like, to be motivated as an individual, you have to understand that the journey is a process of more than one system all aligning to create a new reality or to create a final disposition or outcome. So if you accept the end result as the everyday reality, then you'll never appreciate how the current reality is transforming to produce that which you're trying to perceive with your mind. So when you eliminate that from, your when you eliminate that from, I guess you could say, your level of wisdom. If you eliminate that from your current wisdom, then you miss the opportunity to produce that which you expect, if that makes sense.
It does. It
Mhm.
does. Is that the same as like some of us are like, yeah, if I can't receive, if I can't receive the whole thing, I just won't even try for any of it. Is that sort of like, yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so because it's the training of the mind to believe that instant gratification is the success of the desire, and it's not. It's, if I can't have it all, I don't want it all. Well, that's, you need to get the small pieces to create the big picture, or the big, complete the big puzzle. So if you don't get it all, then you should take that one little bit of piece. Nothing. And it's so funny that, because we're all guilty of it in some aspect of our lives, rather we're able to recognize it or not.
Right.
But we'll apply those principles to what we can understand. But when something's new or abstract from our norm, we forget that that's the process for everything. It's the same way with business, with education, with marriage, family, kids, with health, with, it's the same thing with everything, but we miss it. We miss that moment because it doesn't, it's a new, like, it's the practicing of a new, for lack of better words, a new profession or a new area of life. So if you want the entire, the entire piece, start with the small piece first.
Yeah.
Yes. And everything, not just
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
one thing or the other. I can look back and I can apply I can apply that mistake a lot of times to a lot of things in my life. And yet other things I'm like, oh, well, this is a building process. I got to do this, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do this. And then in other parts of my life, I'm just like, well, I don't get it all. I'm just not even gonna mess with it.
Yeah. Get to the finish line
Yeah.
yesterday, right? Yeah.
You're so right.
Yeah. And I want to go just a little bit deeper here for a moment. If so, we have a lot of coaches and consultants and experts that listen to this program, and they're looking for ways to better their business, to grow their business, to differentiate themselves, and so forth. And let's say a lot of them have small teams, small to medium sized teams. And so there's always that conflict resolution, that expectations not being met, things like that. How do you know when it's a something you can affect, like that you can make an impact with and you can help that person, or when it's something beyond your capabilities where you look at it and say, okay, there's some definite deeper mindset issues and personal things there that I'm not sure I can affect? I really, I'm not real sure what I'm asking there, Dr. Richardson, but I think, how do you know that? How do you know when you can help somebody and when you can't? Maybe that's the deeper issue.
So I had that experience. I had a coach at some point in my life, and I learned that what I was looking for, and I had to learn this the hard way after I spent at least 12 to somewhere between 12 to $15,000, which is a significant amount of money. Um, you learn from, just in the coaching world, you know what you can and can't do. And whatever it is that you advertise, because you're advertising and marketing your services to what may or may not always be your target audience. But if someone sees interest and find value in you, then they're assuming that you have the expertise and the knowledge to get them where they're going. But in the beginning stages of you looking for a client or sourcing a client, or if a client finds you, you should be able to assess them before you ever determine if you're going to work with them or not, because it's a disadvantage to them. And another problem that I've noticed with the coaching world is that coaching services are extremely overpriced. And the reason why I say that is because part of the problem with coaching an individual, they're looking at return on investment based on what you're giving them. So if you can't solve their problems, but their payment is solving your problems, then that's a one-ended transaction. I believe it's called unilateral is what it is.
Mhm.
So the pressure of them accomplishing their goal with your service is also going to align with them seeing their financial stability decrease over time. And that's going to add more pressure to them wanting the problem solved. But you may or may not be the person for the job. So you have to be able to have someone on your team who can to step in or kind of collaborate with one another to help them solve their problem, or just be transparent and tell them in the beginning, hey, this is not something I believe I can help you with. But if you can't help them with that, don't lure them in for other parts of your services because they're looking for something specific.
I could
Agreed,
not. Oh my gosh.
100%.
And I tell you, I talk with a lot of people before they come into our program, and you would not believe, I know you would probably, but a lot of people out there might not believe how often we hear, I heard it today again. A guy stopped right in the middle of our program and he said, I just want to say thank you. And I said, okay, for what? And he said, because a lot of people out there don't deliver. And he said, this is our first meeting and you've already delivered. And he said, I just want to say thank you for it. And I think you're right. I think it's just people get on this role of, I want more clients. I want more of this. I want more money. And they're willing to give a piece or try to find a fit somewhere when it's not a natural fit. And that is a huge mistake that's being made in coaching these days, Dr.
Oh, it's
Richardson.
big.
It's huge. Absolutely huge.
It's one thing that Tanya did a long time ago. She with BrandFace, she decided, and we teach the ideal customer, looking for the ideal customer, but she's like, this is our lane. And we don't come out of that lane. And there's a lot of people that come into our life and they're not ready for that lane yet, or they're not looking for that lane, or they need to solve another problem first. And we were very honest with them. We're like, you got to go do this and then come here, because we're not stepping out of this. We're not shape shifting the program to try to fit, because that's a recipe for failure. And like you're saying, they always end up upset. They didn't get their money's worth. They feel like they're cheated. They wasn't successful with it. And that's the worst thing you ever want as a coach, is for somebody to feel like you haven't delivered. That's terrible. And it's hard for young coaches to turn away possible money for sticking to, this is our lane. Like, this is what we do. But I would love to see the coaching world design that better. And because then I think that everybody gets the service they're paying for and they get a lot of value out of that.
And I'd like to say one last thing, and then I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Richardson, is, when we work with clients on, that return on investment is hugely important. And when we help them figure out what they need to charge for their services, we say, you don't just have to know what you need to charge them and the value you bring, you have to be able to justify that. So if I'm charging you, 5,000 here or 10,000 here, I'd better be able to help you get 15, 20, 25,000 back, right?
Mhm.
In terms of growth. And sometimes it's exponentially more, but you need to understand and have a basis for being able to help somebody do that in the past, and be really clear about what you can and you can't do.
What's interesting about what both of you said, a guy approached me, very respectful guy. I really liked him. However, I saw flaws with his approach, because if you're charging $15,000 to teach someone and prepare them on how to get clients where they can make $10,000, $15,000, then why don't you have those clients yourself? Why are you charging people to teach them how to do it? That tells me that there's a red flag. And then the other thing I think is most important, if you're going to be a coach, set your price at something that's valuable to the client. Because if I'm going to charge you $5,000, what money do you have to invest in your plan? I'd much rather charge you $1,000 to give you a $4,000 space to invest in your own innovation, because you're not going to be able to afford a coach and afford yourself if you're paying 40, 50% of your leisure expenses or your leisure monetary holdings into someone else's service. Because at the end of the day, you're paying for someone's knowledge and time. Time and knowledge is very valuable, which is why we have college institutions and schools. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. But if you can't invest in yourself, then you have a coach for no reason, because then you're going to spend all of this money on coaching. Then you're going to go forward and you're going to, the information that you get is not going to materialize, because whatever you're being coached into, you're new to that industry. People haven't seen your face yet. So you don't have the leverage to say that, oh, well, this is what I do now. People are going to want to know, okay, well, why are you here? Why are you in this industry?
Right.
And the thing about speaking and coaching, it's marketed as one of the number one, profitable, industries in America right now, because you can charge people whatever amount of money, because it's not an industry that's regulated by any licensure. It's not regulated by any certification. Well, I can't say certifications, because you can go get a certificate from anyone who has a platform, but it's not licensed. No one's licensed to be a speaker. No one's licensed to be a coach. It's not a regulated industry.
Right.
Yeah, true.
That is so true. We've been in that space for, 13, 14 years now. And we've talked about that for 13, 14 years.
Yeah.
Because it is buyer beware. I mean, there is a caveat emptor out there. There's a lot of people claim they can do a lot of things, and maybe they can, maybe they can't. Like, you have to really have the goods, and the stickability, and approach it, like you said earlier, from how is it going to affect them? That's the most important part. If they're not getting the value out of it, then you haven't provided what it is that you're selling, and you shouldn't be selling it.
And I would like to say, I do feel like it's somewhat a transparent industry, though, and I'll tell you why. People hold you accountable. They'll give you a terrible review, and they'll tell about every single little thing that went wrong, if it did. And they'll also, by the same token, they will praise your work if indeed it helped them.
Yes,
and
agreed.
And that part of transparency, that is a great thing. So we'll leave it on that positive note there, Dr. Richardson. Yeah. So I can't say enough how wonderful it is to have you on this show, and how great it is to have met you and to know you. You're just a special person, and thank you so much for taking time with us again.
Yeah, and I got to say, I'm so happy to be on here with you and ask you these questions, and we're going to have you back, because there's more questions to be answered. You've got a great way of articulating this and helping people, because all teams need motivation, individuals need motivation, and you have a very clear way of describing those things. And so I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Do you want to share with the listeners, how can they get in touch with Dr. Richardson and work with you?
Yeah.
If you have desire.
Yeah. So first, I just want to let you know, you all can get me back on this show anytime. I'm always open to you all. It's an honor and blessing to be a part of this community. But if you're looking for me, I got rid of the Instagram and the TikTok and all the other social medias, but we're still on LinkedIn, and the website, www.dreasons.com. That's DREASONS.com. We are also, we're getting ready to kind of open up the website, so you'll see a lot of ads and different type of things, and partnering with other businesses and coaches and speakers. Also, I'll be speaking at the Leadership Experience Tour this October in Troy, Michigan. The tickets are online. If you want them, you can contact me on LinkedIn. I can get you the link, or you can look through the post. It's there. It's also on the website in the events tab, so you can see it there also. So if you want to purchase a ticket, it's virtual, or you can arrive in person. Either way, it's going to be an experience, and I'll be talking about a lot of these different motivational and leadership experiences to kind of get people engaged, because what better time than now?
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you again, Dr. Richardson.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. See you all soon.
Ready to change how you're seen and charge what you're worth? If you're not getting enough opportunities to meet with ideal customers, or the prospects you're meeting with just aren't ideal, it's most likely your brand that's holding you back. So if you're a coach, consultant, or expert who is on the rise, you need our ultimate guide to a freedom-based brand. Download it free now at brandfaceguide.com.